When a person makes the intention for Umrah, something profound begins long before they reach Makkah. The journey itself becomes a mirror, forcing the believer to confront who they are beneath the layers of routine, responsibilities, and worldly identities. The transition begins with Ihram, and the beauty of Ihram is that it strips away everything superficial. You are not the professional, the student, the entrepreneur, the influencer, or the respected elder. You are simply a servant of Allah, equal to every other servant standing beside you. There is a psychological liberation in that. For once, you do not have to perform for the world. You only need to present your most honest self before your Creator. That simplicity creates space for inner clarity. Many people underestimate this part of Umrah. They think the power of the journey begins only when they see the Kaaba. But in reality, the purification begins when you detach from your normal environment. Ihram forces the ego into silence. In a world constantly feeding the self with comparisons, competition, and external validation, the state of Ihram becomes a rare moment of self-honesty. You stop asking, how do people see me? And begin asking, how does Allah see me? That shift alone cleanses more than we realize. Umrah teaches that true purification is not about escaping the world. It is about escaping who you become when the world consumes you. The heart becomes heavy when it carries grudges, unconfessed sins, guilt, arrogance, or secret desires. People walk through life with emotional clutter that they never pause to address. But when they put on Ihram, their heart senses a moment of truth has arrived. It feels the weight of its own distance from Allah, and that awareness is not meant to shame, it is meant to awaken. If a believer responds to that awakening with sincerity, the heart naturally inclines toward repentance, not out of fear alone, but out of longing to return to the purity it was created with. The journey of inner cleansing also involves recognizing how temporary everything around us truly is. When we travel for Umrah, we observe ourselves leaving behind our homes, our comfort, our routines, and our identities. And yet, nothing collapses. Life continues. This realization weakens the hold the dunya has on the heart. A person begins to understand that the world's demands are loud, but not essential. What is essential is the state of one's soul and the quality of one's connection to Allah. Ironically, leaving the dunya for a short while helps us navigate it with greater strength when we return. Spiritually, Umrah breaks down the barriers that sins build around the heart. Every transgression, big or small, leaves a mark, a stain that clouds perception, dims motivation, and dulls the remembrance of Allah. But the intention to perform Umrah signals to the heart that a cleansing is coming. By the time the believer reaches the boundaries of the haram, their soul is already softer, already more aware, already more receptive. It's as if the heart recognizes that it is approaching a place where excuses no longer hold meaning. You cannot hide behind your achievements in Makkah. You cannot distract yourself with worldly pursuits. You stand in the most sacred land holding nothing except your deeds, your intentions, and your sincerity. And that is where the true purification happens, not simply through rituals, but through the courage to be honest with oneself. A believer who stands before Allah with honesty, even if burdened by mistakes, is purer than the one who hides behind outward religiousness while ignoring inner decay. Umrah gives you the opportunity to remove that decay, to admit your weaknesses, and to ask Allah to reshape you into someone better than you were before. When the heart tastes that level of humility and honesty, it begins to crave closeness to Allah more than anything the dunya could offer. That is the real cleansing, when the soul remembers what it was always meant to seek. When a person begins Tawaf, something subtle yet transformative starts happening inside them. We circle the Kaaba with our bodies, but in reality, we are training our hearts to revolve around Allah. And this is what most people overlook. Tawaf is not simply about walking in a circle. It is about realigning your entire existence. It's about acknowledging that life will always have countless forces pulling you in different directions, but the believer chooses one center, one ultimate anchor, and that center is Allah. In Tawaf, every step is symbolic. You are moving forward physically, but spiritually you're declaring, my life has direction, and that direction begins and ends with my Creator. The Kaaba becomes a visual representation of that center, an external symbol pointing to an internal commitment. In a world where people place themselves at the center of everything, their desires, their egos, their social image, Tawaf teaches the opposite. It trains you to decenter the self and recenter the divine. There is profound psychological power in that shift. When Allah becomes the axis of your life, anxiety reduces, confusion clears, and priorities fall into place. You no longer chase validation, you chase purpose. You no longer live reactively, you live intentionally. Tawaf also connects you to a spiritual rhythm that has existed since the time of Ibrahim Arabic. Tain Arabic, Lam Arabic, Yet Arabic, Ha Arabic, Alif Arabic, Lam Arabic, Sin Arabic, Lam Arabic, Alif Arabic, Mim. Think of that for a moment. Every lap you take is a continuation of a legacy thousands of years old. You are stepping into the footsteps of prophets, scholars, ordinary believers, and broken souls who came before you seeking healing. The ground you walk on is saturated with the prayers of generations. There is a sense of continuity in Tawaf, a reminder that faith is not a trend or a phase. It is an eternal chain that you are now a part of. That realization alone can shift the heart from a place of casual spirituality to committed devotion. And then there is a deeper layer to Tawaf, one that speaks directly to the human condition. The circular motion mimics the orbit of the planets, the rotation of electrons, the cycles of time, the rhythm of nature. Everything in the universe is in motion, and everything moves according to the order Allah has set. Tawaf is your way of entering that harmony. You are reminding yourself that chaos only enters your life when you step out of alignment with the divine order. When you move in obedience, when you revolve around Allah's guidance, your life flows with a natural ease. But when you revolve around your fears, desires, or impulses, you create turbulence. One of the most powerful aspects of Tawaf is that it is done in a crowd, shoulder to shoulder with strangers. And yet, each person is on their own journey, carrying their own grief, their own hopes, their own silent prayers. You feel the unity of the Ummah, but you also feel the individuality of your connection to Allah. No one knows what you are asking for, what you are repenting for, or what you desperately want Allah to change in your life. Tawaf becomes a place of intimate vulnerability, even amidst thousands. And that contrast is what makes it so deeply spiritual. You are not just one body in a crowd. You are one soul standing before the Almighty. As you circle the Kaaba, you start to notice something inside you settling. The noise of the world begins to fade. Your thoughts become clearer. You become more aware of Allah's presence in your life. That stillness is not accidental. It is the result of reorientation. When the heart turns toward Allah fully, the rest of life turns with it. By the time you finish your 7th round, you've made more than a physical journey. You've performed an inner recalibration. You've reminded your soul of its true center, its true purpose, its true home. When a believer begins sa'i between Safa and Marwah, they are not simply retracing the steps of Hajar. They are stepping into one of the most profound lessons in human history. Sa'i is a physical act, yes, but it is also an emotional and psychological journey. It captures the very essence of what it means to trust Allah, while still exerting every ounce of effort you possess. Hajar was alone in a barren desert with nothing but an infant and the certainty that Allah does not abandon his servants. Her running between two hills was not irrational panic. It was purposeful striving born from unwavering faith. And that combination, effort tied to trust, is the core of Sa'i. When you repeat her steps, you feel the weight of that balance. You are reminded that faith is never passive. It is not a feeling you keep in your heart while remaining still. It is a force that pushes you to move, to try, to seek solutions even when you cannot see the outcome. Hajar could not see water. She could not understand how relief would come, yet she kept running, she kept searching. She kept hoping. That is the spiritual psychology of Sa'i. You keep moving because you trust that Allah sees what you cannot. In life, all of us will face our own between Safa and Marwah. Moments, situations where the heart feels stretched, where fear and uncertainty collide, where the path ahead seems hollow and empty. Sa'i symbolizes those moments. The hills are small, but the emotional journey they represent is enormous. Each round between them is a reminder that desperation, when tied to faith, becomes a doorway to divine intervention. Even your weakest moments can become the birthplace of your greatest miracles if you refuse to surrender your trust in Allah. There is also a humbling truth embedded in Sa'i. Allah did not send Zamzam while Hajar was sitting still. The miracle descended when she was in motion. This alone shifts our understanding of spirituality. We cannot seek progress while remaining passive. We cannot pray for change while refusing the work that change demands. Sa'i teaches us that you don't wait for Allah's help by standing still. You move toward it. You take the first step, and then the next, and then the next. When your effort reaches its limit, Allah's mercy takes over. But there is another subtle lesson here. Relief didn't come from the hills she was running toward. It came from beneath her child, in a place she wasn't even looking. And that is how Allah works. Sometimes you run toward what you think is the solution, only to discover that Allah brings the answer from an unexpected direction. Your Sa'i is not about finding the solution yourself. It is about demonstrating your sincerity so that Allah grants you a solution beyond your imagination. This is where Sa'i becomes profoundly philosophical. It teaches you that effort is your responsibility, but outcomes belong entirely to Allah. As you walk or run between Safa and Marwah, you also develop an awareness of your own inner strength. Many people underestimate the resilience they carry until they are placed in a test. Sa'i is a reminder that the human spirit, when fueled by faith, can survive more than it ever believed it could. The simple act of moving back and forth becomes a reflection of life's constant push and pull, moments of hope, moments of fear, moments of strength, moments of weakness. Yet through it all, you keep moving, and the more you move, the more your heart learns to rely on Allah's promise rather than the illusion of your own control. By the time you complete the 7th round, you're not just finishing a ritual. You're internalizing a world view. You walk away understanding that true trust in Allah is not silent surrender. It is active, persistent striving infused with certainty that your Lord sees your efforts and will never let them go to waste. There is a moment in Ummrah that cannot be fully described in words, only experienced. The moment you first stand before the Kaaba. No matter how many pictures you have seen, no matter how familiar you think you are with its structure, the sight of it in real life collapses every barrier inside you. It is not just a building, it is an anchor for the heart. You feel something soften, something surrender, something awaken. And in that moment, the illusion of worldly greatness begins to dissolve. Standing before the Kaaba is an encounter with truth. You realize that everything you chase in life, status, power, recognition, wealth, is fragile, temporary, and ultimately irrelevant in the grand scale of existence. Here, no one knows who you are. No one cares about your career, your accomplishments, your reputation, or your influence. You are one among millions, equal in worth, equal in need, equal in your dependence on the mercy of Allah. There is a deep psychological release in that equality. The burdens of ego slip away when you recognize that the only thing that defines you in this sacred space is the state of your heart. This humility is not humiliation, it is liberation. When you remove the layers that society forces upon you, your labels, your roles, your achievements, you finally meet yourself without distortion. And that is when true transformation begins. You confront the parts of yourself you avoid in daily life. Your weaknesses, your mistakes, your regrets, your inconsistencies. Yet you do so without despair, because the Kaaba is not a place of judgment. It is a place of return. You sense that Allah is inviting you back, reminding you that your worth was never measured by worldly standards, but by sincerity and submission. In this space, humility becomes empowering. You recognize how small you are in the universe, but you also realize how meaningful you become when you align yourself with Allah's guidance. The world teaches you to inflate your ego. Makkah teaches you to elevate your soul. The world tells you to accumulate more. The Kaaba teaches you to strip yourself down to truth. The world praises those who stand above others. The Kaaba honors those who bow the deepest. And when you observe thousands of people standing with you, different languages, different cultures, different experiences, you witness a unity that transcends every division humanity has created. There is something profoundly healing about seeing all of humanity equalized before one Lord. It reminds you that your personal struggles, your private pain, your silent prayers are part of a universal human experience. Everyone around you is seeking forgiveness, seeking hope, seeking change. You feel connected, not in weakness, but in shared longing. This humility also creates clarity. When you lower your ego, you lower the noise inside your mind. The heart becomes receptive. Dua flows naturally. Tears come without effort. You begin to see your life with new perspective. What truly matters, what deserves your energy, what needs to be let go. Standing before the Kaaba, many people realize that they have been carrying burdens that were never theirs to carry. They realize that they have been chasing things that add nothing to their soul. They realize that their relationship with Allah was meant to be the center, yet it became overshadowed by distractions. The Kaaba becomes a mirror that reflects your soul without filters, and that honesty is what allows transformation. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can finally begin rebuilding yourself correctly, on foundations of faith, gratitude, sincerity, and obedience. When you step away from that sacred site, you do not leave unchanged. Something shifts inside you. Something settles. Something reorients itself toward Allah. There is a unique spiritual atmosphere in Makkah that cannot be replicated anywhere else in the world. It's not just about the physical location, the historical weight, or the rituals themselves. It's about the way the heart feels when it stands in the presence of the sacred. When a believer raises their hands in dua during Ummrah, something in the soul becomes more open, more vulnerable, more receptive. It's as if the barriers that normally stand between the heart and its deepest truths begin to melt away. Dua in this land pierces through emotional layers that we often don't even realize we carry. Part of this profound effect comes from the environment itself. You are surrounded by a collective hum of worship voices reciting Quran, tears being shed, hopes being whispered. The air feels charged with sincerity, the mind becomes still. The heart begins to remember its original purpose. In such a space, dua is no longer a routine habit, but a deeply personal conversation with the Lord of the worlds. You don't have to search for words. Your heart begins to speak on its own. There is also a psychological transparency that emerges during these moments. In your everyday life, you may hide your struggles beneath responsibilities, distractions, or social expectations. But in the sacred land, that facade becomes harder to maintain. You suddenly realize how much you need Allah. You become aware of the gaps in your life, the plans that have stalled, wounds that haven't healed, sins you haven't confronted. And rather than overwhelming you, this awareness pushes you toward Allah with humility and hope. You begin to understand that the heart cannot carry these burdens alone. Dua in Makkah teaches a powerful lesson about vulnerability, that strength does not come from pretending you are fine. It comes from admitting that you are not, and seeking the one who can make you whole again. This is where psychological depth meets spiritual truth. A person who pours their heart out to Allah becomes emotionally lighter, mentally clearer, spiritually stronger. The act of dua becomes therapy for the soul. It untangles confusion, dissolves anxiety, and replaces fear with trust. And then there is the theological weight of making dua in this place. You are standing in a land where countless supplications have been accepted across centuries. The prophets made dua here. The righteous cried here. Ordinary believers poured out their pain here. When you stand in their footsteps, you become part of that spiritual chain. You feel connected to a legacy of seekers who came to this place with their brokenness and left with renewed clarity and hope. This awareness amplifies your sincerity. You raise your hands not just with wishful thinking, but with conviction that Allah hears you, sees you, and knows the depth of what you are asking for. And perhaps what makes these du'as so transformative is the way they shift your relationship with Allah. You stop seeing him as distant or unreachable. You feel his nearness. The heart senses a closeness that words cannot express. You realize that Allah is not only the Lord who commands, but also the Lord who comforts, who listens, who responds. Even if you don't see immediate results, something internal changes. You leave with a renewed sense of companionship with your Creator. You start to trust his timing more, surrender to his wisdom more, rely on his mercy more. Many people return from Ummrah carrying the memory of a single dua, a moment when their heart opened in a way it never had before. That moment becomes an anchor for the rest of their lives. It becomes a reminder that Allah is always near, even when you are far from the sacred land. What you feel in Makkah is not meant to stay in Makkah. It's meant to follow you home. By the time you finish your dua, you may not have all the answers, but you have something far more powerful, a heart that feels seen and heard by its Lord. When a person completes Ummrah, the physical rituals may end, but the spiritual journey is meant to continue. The greatest mistake a believer can make is to treat Ummrah as an event rather than a transformation. The real test begins not in the sacred precincts of Makkah, but in the ordinary routines of daily life. When you return to the same home, the same relationships, the same responsibilities, the same struggles that existed before your journey, the question becomes, what did Ummrah change inside you, and how will that change reshape the way you live? Returning home with a renewed identity is not about carrying the emotional high of the pilgrimage. Emotional highs fade. It is about carrying the clarity, humility, discipline, and gratitude that Ummrah reawakens. The experiences you lived in those sacred days are not meant to become memories, they are meant to become guiding principles. If standing before the Kaaba broke your ego, then humility should accompany you in every interaction. If Sa'i taught you resilience, then you carry that resilience into your challenges. If Tawaf centered you around Allah, then your choices and priorities must now revolve around him. If your dua softened your heart, then that softness must be preserved even when life becomes noisy again. The transformation after Ummrah demands intentionality. You cannot live passively and expect your spiritual state to remain elevated. Just as the rituals of Umrah required conscious effort, maintaining the effects of Umrah requires conscious effort as well. It may mean reorganizing your schedule to protect your salah. It may mean limiting certain distractions that previously consumed your time and energy. It may mean replacing unhealthy habits with meaningful acts of worship. It may mean addressing long avoided sins that you finally had the courage to confront in Makkah. And perhaps the most significant part of returning home is the shift in mindset. Umrah reminds you that life is temporary, fragile, and unpredictable. You stood in a place where millions before you stood and millions after you will stand. You witnessed people of every background and circumstance unified in their longing for Allah. You saw how insignificant worldly status becomes in the face of divine truth. When you carry that awareness into everyday life, your worries shrink. Your priorities realign. You become less reactive, less attached, less consumed by the trivial concerns that dominate society. But renewal after Umrah is not just personal, it is relational. The believer who returns home with a purified heart influences everyone around them. Your patience becomes a source of calm for your family. Your kindness becomes a source of healing for your relationships. Your steadiness becomes a source of stability for your community. When Allah reforms the heart of one person, that reformation radiates outward. You also begin to see the world differently. You notice blessings you previously overlooked. You feel gratitude in situations you once took for granted. You find yourself turning to Allah more quickly in times of difficulty and thanking Him more readily in times of ease. That is what a renewed identity looks like. Faith becomes your first instinct, not your last resort. And perhaps the most beautiful transformation is the longing that takes root in the heart, the longing to return. A believer who has tasted the spiritual sweetness of Umrah carries a quiet ache, a pull toward the sacred, a desire to return to that state of closeness with Allah. This longing becomes a compass that keeps the heart from drifting too far. Even when life becomes overwhelming, even when sins weigh you down, even when distractions pull at you, the memory of who you were in Makkah calls you back to who you want to be. So when you return home, understand that the journey is not over. It has only shifted form. The rituals ended, but the transformation must continue. What you gained in Makkah is not meant to stay in Makkah. It is meant to become the blueprint for the rest of your life.